Welcome to The Current by TreasureCoast.com, where we discuss interesting people, places, and happenings on Florida's Treasure Coast.
Susan, thanks so much for being on. I appreciate you coming on to talk with me. You are running for District 2 in Martin County. Why don't we talk about maybe you just introduce yourself to start off for anybody who might be seeing you or hearing you for the first time?
Sure. Thanks, Josh. I'm happy to be here. As you said, I'm Susan O'Rourke. I'm running for District 2, and I am a mother of three sons that I raised here in Martin County. They're off now on their own. I usually start with them because that's like the best part of my life. My oldest son is working on his PhD in genetics at University of Missouri in Columbia. My middle son just got married and is living in Connecticut, and he's an electrical engineer. And my youngest son he graduated from the Naval Academy last year. He went Marines, so he did Quantico graduation this year, and he's serving in Okinawa. So they were raised here in Stuart. We moved here in 2001. It was at the time I was married, and I had my two oldest children were born in California, and then my youngest was born here in Martin Memorial. And I have been an engineer since 1985, and I started my own business in 1989. So I was 26 years old, and I started the business in California, sold that when we moved here, started again, and I just sold that business in 2024. So I've been semi-retired and decided that retirement was maybe premature for me. so here I am.
That's funny. That seems to be a recurring theme for people. You retire and then things get quiet pretty quickly, huh?
Well, I said for me, retired is a verb. It wasn't like a title. I stopped being the owner of an engineering firm, and but I knew I would be looking for other things. I have a couple of small deals, little businesses. I had one where I tried to connect single people to nonprofits. That's called Singles in Service. So I started working on that and put that on the back burner while I, took this turn.
That's very cool. That's very cool. Yeah, and God bless you for raising three boys. It sounds like you did a good job based on what they're doing now. I was raised with a few brothers, and it got chaotic pretty quickly. I should ask you. I mean, I guess you might have kind of covered it with your background and being semi-retired. But what made you want to jump in to start the race? What kind of spurred you to want to be part of the Martin County Commission?
Yeah, so I said it's kind of a two reasons, really, kind of a negative and a positive. I still was participating in community activities and going to city commission, county commission meetings for topics of interest, and there were some things happening at the city when I retired, and then, so I was following up, and I really did not like the tone of the politics, did not like the interaction from the dais with the public commenters. I did not like the moratorium that was put in place. There were a lot of things happening that were negative. And when, Chris Collins quit his position at the city, he left early to run for county commission. I kind of was watching that. I didn't know that Stacey Hetherington was not going to run again. When I found out she wasn't going to run, I started thinking about whether that would be something I want to do. And then another person stepped in, Casey, and I was like, it looked like he had some support behind him. So I, went on to other things. And then when Casey dropped out and it looked like Chris was going to run unopposed, I just didn't think that was a good idea. So I decided to run. Of course, Althea qualified on the final day. But I still think that she wouldn't have been able to capitalize in time. And so I decided to run. And so that was the negative part that got me focused on running. But I've always I used to say I wanted to be the mayor of Miami because I grew up in Miami, but I was always looking for that time and place when it would be right for me. I ran 20 years ago. Maybe it wasn't the right time. It was here in Stuart, and but this felt like the right time, and I've got the time to dedicate, and I've got the resources as far as I don't need to work. I don't need to, I'm not needing to pinch pennies. So I can really be focused on, on serving the people of Martin County. And I think a lot of what I've heard from people, we hear about development, but a lot of it is the traffic related to the development. And I've spent my life solving traffic problems. So I feel like it's a good fit. And all of the things that when you're on the private sector side, there's things you can't do. You are restricted by the rules and what
Right.
what the public agencies want. So being in a position on the public sector side, I feel like there's a lot of ideas I can put forward and maybe some cost saving things. And there's some planning level things that I want to do where I see a disconnect that year after year, I see the same pieces of missing data that, because not only am I going to say, hey, we should do this, I have the ability, I can draft some language for staff. I can go out in the field and drive around and, I can be actually, a technician, if you will, that can help solve those problems. So I keep saying it's a 2-for-1, engineers are
Right.
pretty expensive and you're going to get one for free. So, it's
Yeah.
really my double duty as commissioner.
Well, and
So.
I think that's some good points you bring up too. And I think you're right. I think when it comes to like traffic or there are so many things that I think people they think of when they think of the future Mark County or where they want it to go. From your perspective, what do you think are the top things? 3-4 things that you think are facing Martin County that could really be focused on in the next, I guess we could say 4 years, 5 years.
Well, one of the things that, the important things we have to focus on, which I've been saying, we continue to focus on. So the water, the ecosystems, preserving the land. We have a history in Martin County of doing that, but you don't want to take your eye off the prize. So
Right.
people, we don't want to become complacent with that. We've had a lot of big wins. They require constant relationship building and, constant, whether you want to call it lobbying or, communication with the state, federal partners. So that's something we have to maintain and continue to work harder. There's been a lot of gains on with Lake Okeechobee, things of that nature. So I think that's important. I think we've laid the groundwork. We just stay the course in those areas. I do think that we'll have to see where the referendum goes. And whether the referendum passes or not, I think that as elected people, if I were to be elected, people are telling you that their issues are, that they are concerned about the cost of housing and they were looking for some type of relief. I don't say we, the elected officials didn't deliver necessarily on assistance or, maybe we made some small gains with insurance, but no big gains. And there's been a lot of cost ramp ups and whether they're the fault, whose fault it is, anywhere anybody could do something, I think there was some hope that something would be done. And when it wasn't, that's where I think this, and the state placed it back on the locals, which I don't agree with. I don't agree with, we need to retain local control. And that's why relative to that referendum, I said, if it did pass, I'd like to see us lobby immediately to have a percentage of the sales tax or something of that nature brought back for local control so we can make decisions on where best to spend the money and we're not scrimping and saving, because of this thing. So those are a couple of the areas. I do think, as I've been saying about affordability, and maybe that's more than the 2 or 3 things, but I think
No, that's
affordability
great. That's great.
is like every decision you make really affects, there's
Right.
the two sides, right? There's the cost inputs, and then there's cost of living, there's wages. So if you're making decisions on bringing businesses into the community or not bringing business in, that affects people's ability to increase their wages and have good paying jobs. If you are putting restrictions in place or regulations, you are going to increase the price of housing or increase the price of other goods and services. So, a lot of decisions indirectly affect affordability. It's not just affordable housing. When people, they're thinking you're going to have this type of structure, there's a lot of things that are just basic decisions you make that affect that. So we need to be aware of that. I would like it, as a mother, I think safety is very important, and not just as a mother, but I think as a mother, you kind of notice those things more.
Sure.
And on the roadways, it seems like, I know sometimes it's an algorithm. You look at one thing, so now you're going to see it all the time. But it feels, and that's one of the things that I've made a commitment to, is working and trying to work with law enforcement and the engineering department to see. A lot of times we look at things one or the other, and we do a kind of a quantitative analysis where here are the top 10 most dangerous intersections. We'll do a study on it, and maybe we get some money for it. But really looking at it in terms of from the theoretical side on the engineering side to the practical application of an officer who drives that street every day, sees these accidents, deals with the outcome. A lot of times you'll get a little bit of a different perspective, and that might be the difference of making an improvement that saves lives. So I think that's important. We've done it in a couple of other areas of business, and I think it's effective to do that kind of collaborating where it's not maybe normally done or done at the same level. And also one of the things that I would like to address, because I feel like depending on who gets elected in that seat 4, right, you've got a history that's been maintained. So like the water and some of that stuff is in good position. We have the sales tax on our lands. And so it would give me time to focus on things like transportation that I've been discussing. I think there's some real headway we can make there that would make people feel more comfortable that we were addressing things quickly. I'd also like us to look at, as I mentioned, the affordability, but mental health and homelessness is a topic that comes up a lot in private conversations, but rarely as a policy. And I know it's been discussed at the county commission, and I know that 10th City Helpers was almost weekly discussing the homelessness situation. But I would like to see that become something so it just it's not discussed and, like it's a new thing every time, that we actually get a good baseline on it, and I know there's some studies underway, and a lot of the nonprofits work in certain areas. And I think having a good structure around that so it doesn't fade away, that we again, I say, like, keep your eye on the prize. I use the anecdote. I was talking to someone last night about this, and I said, when I was working with the robotic team, I was trying to get them a building, and they didn't get the building until after I got off the board. And I said, but the point was, every elected official, every person who had a building, anybody who had vacant land, I had spoken to them all. So whenever anything came up, that robotics team was on top of mind for everybody, getting them a home. And so when the new school board came, they were able to, all of the work was laid out. And so I feel like it's similar. We may not be able to get where we want right now, but you're never going to get there if you don't start. And it's just like a road or an improvement. It's got to be on a map. It's got to be in a plan. It can't just be talk. And so memorializing things is the beginning, and then continued support. So those are some of the things that I feel I can really be helpful on and focus attention or bring attention to, and start a strategy to making some progress. And interestingly enough, that topic, people tend to, the lightning rod is development and traffic. And then after, like, you have a 2-minute conversation about that, people do get into this other conversation about affordability and what are we going to do about, mental health and homelessness and that kind of thing. And so I think it deserves some attention.
I think that's a good point too, and you're right. Like the homelessness can be, and we had Gail from Tent City Helpers on the podcast probably like a year ago at this point, and because we had
Mhm.
talked to people who had told us we should talk to them, and it is something. There are a lot of things that are kind of out in the open. They're discussed constantly, and there are certain things that are maybe put under. Maybe don't have as much light on them, and as you put it, a lot of these things tend to compound, or they affect an issue will affect another issue. I mean, you brought up transit. I'm interested to hear from your point. I mean, since your background as an engineer in traffic, mentioning transit, I mean, I guess at the risk of maybe it's obviously a technical subject, but are there any opportunities that you see in a place like transit, traffic, that you think could be improved on, or could be kept in mind in the future?
Well, I am a supporter of Brightline and bringing the train into Stuart. And once you do that, I think that like the Uber system is one of the cheapest ways to deliver on transportation, especially if they link trips. And the Metropolitan or the Transportation Planning Organization, MPO, TPO, they're going to be looking at that. We've got some studies in the long range plan. The long range plan right now goes out to 2050, and there's some networks in there that rely on like the demand responsive service, which is the demand responsive used to be done by the public sector, and it's very expensive, and but it's still cheaper than fixed route service with no one on it. So we are spending more money on fixed route transit, which a fixed route, is just a standard bus route that it's going to be there at a certain time. And we
Right.
run on what are called, headways. It's not a lot of frequency. And we don't have really good ridership in Martin County. And every time that a route gets put in, it typically, what they think might be a good idea doesn't last. So, but you get federal money for that. So a lot of times people implement these programs because there's money for them. And so I know that there's going to be some kind of, I'm trying to think of what the word I want to use. That's like a sample. They're going to a trial run on some of these
Right.
networks and all of the CRAs. So, I personally don't think that one size fits all. Like just because, like, why not try it in one CRA, see how it goes before you spend a bunch of money on them, because you may find that the conditions are right somewhere else. And, like you can see in Stuart, a lot of times the trolley turned into like a tour bus, and, so, the little shuttle that runs around
Right. Yeah.
in
Downtown.
Stuart. And yeah, and it's good for festivals and getting people to the parking lot and that kind of thing. But a true circulation system that replaces the car. I think in Stuart we don't have quite the right programming, and that's why I like the use of Uber. And one of the areas, and there are different programs, and I don't have the exact names of them and all, but like the veterans can use service, and it's paid through the county, and that service was cut from what I was told on a couple of my visits to the assisted living facilities. So that would be something I would want to look at, because what you don't want to do is say, hey, we have this pot of money, and because we can, deliver the service cheaper, we're going to now limit them because we're going to save that money. I think some of these things, especially in the veterans, people who being able to go places and have transportation accessibility is critical to your quality of life. And so, if we were able to give those people 2 or 3 rides now because we were able to, save the money by going to this different system, they've been telling me they got cut down and they're limiting their rides. So I'd have to check and make sure, what the thing is. But you really do want people to be able to get out and get to the doctors and get to their shopping and all those kinds of things. But in Stuart, if we were to do the Brightline, then you can start looking at connecting Brightline. And depending on where it ended up, the location in the city of Stuart, the nice thing was you're right by the courthouse. So if you have people who are currently coming to the courthouse, say a Palm Beach attorney or a Miami attorney, they don't have to drive. They can just be on the train. They don't need a car. So there was some concern about parking. There's going to be some offsetting in there because they should be some of the same people are coming and making use of the parking now. And similarly, if people were visiting, they could just walk in. There's going to be a couple hotels now in the downtown area within walking distance. So that creates a nice network. The ability to walk is, it's relatively free. We've got to pay for the sidewalks and maintenance of the sidewalks, but otherwise, it's people. And but you could also start to see where people are going once they got off the train, and then provide that, whether it's the Stuart shuttle or one of these new circulation systems. They're the smaller vehicle. They typically cost less money to operate and are adaptable, and that's what makes them a good system. You can change it if you find out something isn't working. The demand functions a little differently, you can modify. So, but I think those are some options. And talking to a lot of people, especially, we have an older population, maybe not as comfortable using transit and Uber, but are looking for alternatives. So there may be some education there. I've talked to a lot of people who do have family down south, and as they've gotten older, do not want to drive and have asked about supporting the train for that purpose. So, I think I definitely think there are opportunities. And again, the roadway, I think we can connect one of the things, because I like to call myself a practitioner, you're out there dealing with traffic all the time. And, a lot of sometimes the planning, it's done with a different tool. We use a modeling tool, and sometimes the data that's in that modeling tool doesn't match our actual land use and our proposed land use and where projects are coming in. So, which if it's not matching, you're going to end up building your roads in the wrong place. That's why you'll see, why is this road still 2 lanes and the money's being put over here where there's nothing planned? And that's because it's using, a model that's maybe scales everything up the same when the development's actually in one location versus spread out evenly. So because I see that all the time, I feel like that taking a little more time on the front end of some of these things would give us a better outcome. And because all of that, those tools are used to look at transit and to look at the roadways and look at the freeways. And, and there's a bunch of silly rules about, I used to laugh about it because the FDOT has the way they decide if a road's over capacity and eligible for funding and that kind of thing. They base the road. It used to be on county, and then so you could be driving on the same road and all of a sudden, according to them, your 4-lane road needs to be 8-lane. Nobody wants the 8-lane. It's a reverse, but it's because of the rules. And a lot of time, I went to almost every meeting several years ago about this on this strategic intermodal system, because I'm you're saying this road here has capacity of 500 per hour, and then you drive over this imaginary line and now it's got 2,000 in an hour.
Right.
And I tried to say that so you could bring up, just highlight why some of these rules. In theory, people are just calculating numbers. If you actually have to use them out in the field, you're like, these don't make any sense. So that type of practical knowledge, I think, will be very helpful as a commissioner, and being able to look at some of the things that staff brings forward, or if an applicant comes in, I'm going to know, no, this is not right. This is, and I just think that's experience that will be helpful.
I think that's a good point too, when you mention the different areas. And you had mentioned affordable housing, and I'm interested if you think about that, when you're driving around, or maybe if you have, I'm sure you've given thought to it to some degree. what affordable housing looks like from the county's perspective. I mean, how it can be, you know, I think some people feel apathetic that at a local level we can do so much maybe to provide or assist with affordable housing. I mean, of course, a lot of people here, they'll talk
Well,
about the hot button things are like apartments, they're this development or this. I mean, do you think about certain areas that might be better? Do you think about certain offerings that would be better for the public here?
yeah. So the way I problem solve, and I guess I allude to my robotics team stuff because I think it's really the way that worked was they get a problem set. You know, that all the teams in the world have one problem set, but you go to a competition, there's 64 teams, all with a different solution to the same problem. And that's
Interesting.
how engineers are taught to think. In government, it's like we come up with one answer and we just apply it everywhere the same. Centralized planning comes down from the feds and everybody does the same thing. It's just not a good way to solve our problems. And so affordable housing to me, again, I spoke about inputs like decisions people make. Regulations increase the cost of housing. You know, good paying jobs increase people's income. That makes housing either, you know, depending on how you're doing it, affects people's ability because affordability is about, do you have enough money to afford a house without, you know, straining yourself? So that 30%, 25, 30%, you know, range of your income. So when you look at it like that, what's affordable to me is different than somebody else. And what's affordable to somebody coming into the market, you know, and then we talk about workforce housing, our nurses, our firemen, our police officers, our teachers, you know, and then you look at people in the service industry. So it looks different. So the answers might be different. And, you know, I look at the apartments, I mean, because that was like a flashpoint, but those apartments did a couple of things. And I'm not going to go on to the whole, do I love apartments? Do I not love apartments? But the apartments have people living in them that came from somewhere, you know. Did they come from St. Lucie County because now they could afford to live in Martin County and they're no longer driving through some of it because the traffic on US 1 has been constant for about, well, in 2026 and 2016, the numbers are very similar, despite some of these new, you know, developments, apartments coming online, and despite what's going on in St. Lucie County. And part of that is the balance of housing within our own community, the balance of jobs within our own community. And then we've got about, I think it's 19%, somewhere in that range, of people who are now working from home post-COVID that we didn't have before. So some of those things have affected the traffic,
Right.
but also people's ability to afford something differently. But product types and thinking a little bit outside of the box. So I work with Habitat for Humanity on their board, and I work on an affordable housing committee with House of Hope. So one of the things I did when I bought the house I'm sitting in right now, I wanted to renovate the house, but it's either going to be, it's going to be a major project either way. What I've done with it now is just a minimal thing, but we were going to put a accessory dwelling unit in the back because accessory dwelling units is one way to provide housing to a certain market. Is that going to be everybody's? No, but somebody who could live in a 300, 500 square foot unit, and now somebody in Martin County is able to do that. Those rules were changed, so you could rent out an accessory dwelling unit. You know, you have to meet certain criteria. So that's something that Martin County is doing. That's a small thing, but it's something we've been working on because we're trying to attack it from all angles. And, you know, there are projects that are being looked at. There are some apartment builders that deal in that subsidized or reduced price housing. They work with, I think they are getting tax credits or something like that, but the rates are reduced on percentages of the units. So that's another thing. I mean, not each thing you do isn't going to solve it for everyone. But if you start, you know, somewhere, you begin that process. And I was talking about, I have a friend who does little uh, construction projects in downtown Stuart and builds some unique products that would kind of like, they're not big, but maybe you have a unit that instead of it being one house with two bedrooms, it's got two separate units but they share a kitchen and a living room. So similar to some of the dorms, you know, at least when I went to college, we
Right.
had maybe 5 units. We all had our own rooms and our own bathrooms, but we shared kitchen and living room. And those are some of the things, the products that are coming online and we are looking at. And when you do something like that, you have to make sure you have zoning and, you know, your regulations in place to support some innovative thinking, because I think it's going to take that. And you know, there were some proposals back when I was on LPA at the city of Stuart to make the minimum square footage like 22 or 2,500 square feet. City of Stuart was entertaining something similar, you know, and that's like way not a good thing. You know, you can't, you know, you don't want to have a large single family house as your prototype, because we're not going to be able to make that affordable. It just isn't
Right.
possible. Um, you can get, like, what I did discover in the process of working on this house is that even an accessory dwelling unit is coming in at like $150,000 to get
Yeah.
it built,
Yeah.
get your ground ready, get it permitted, and bring it in on a crane. So, you know, but I also found that I could do a manufactured home or a modular home that meets all of the wind criteria, the structural criteria, for about half of what I could build it for. You know, so as you got to a bigger home, some of those savings came into play. So that's something I would consider, so I don't end up with $1 million, 1,200 square foot house. You know, so,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
the
Right.
construction costs are very, very high right now. And that is making the whole affordability, you know, because it starts with that. Like, can you literally
Sure.
build something? And it's, I mean, it's very expensive. So some of these things like the container trucks that people are doing, and you know, we're exploring all of those things to see what can you actually build, even if you had the land. Like, but we're taking the land out of the equation at House or Habitat for Humanity, and it's still, you know, quite a bit just to build it, and that's using the labor of the volunteers and the new homeowners. So it's going to keep being an issue, but I do sense there are a lot of people interested, but they've got to stay interested. You know, this we're getting little bits of interest, and we're going to build on that. A lot of times people think when you say affordable housing, you're talking about bringing in some big piece of housing that you're going to do reduced price housing on, and that's not it at all. We're looking at all the pieces, all the different people who need housing, and how do you deliver it, and what is the role of government. It's not just, but like I said, the decisions we make affect the price, and they affect, you know, they affect both sides of the equation. So you have to keep it, you know, even if you're not looking at it specifically, indirectly, you're affecting it. So
You know, and I think you're right that in a lot of ways, I think it helps to have maybe a more nuanced approach to things that we think about on a local and probably at higher levels as well. Susan, before we finish up, do you want to? Is there anything else that you think would be useful to touch on? I definitely would like for you to say, you know, maybe where people can learn more about you or follow you or see what you have going. And
yeah, I will just say, because I spoke to several people yesterday, we had a little rally, and you know, people are still hearing because of this lawsuit that was placed against me about where I live, that they don't understand that I didn't just move to Martin County. I lived in Martin County for 24 years. And when my youngest son graduated, and, you know, we had a 4 bedroom, 4 bath house that, you know, I'm rambling around a by myself. So I made that decision to sell. And anyone who's gone through the empty nest knows that's not an easy decision. And so I bought this place out in Nettles Island and realized that was not where I needed to be. And so I moved back to Stuart. But a lot of people, I've been involved in delivering Meals on Wheels. My church was St. Joseph. My kids went to St. Joseph. I just started going to church a few years ago at St. Martin de Porres, and I'm very active there. And, I go to the packing plant for House of Hope and volunteer on Fridays. I've been on many committees, the Air Show Board, many years doing that. And so I've been active in the Martin County community. My sons all played I-9 sports and YMCA soccer and Pop Warner football, baseball. My son was, did athletics, baseball and basketball at Jensen Beach High School. And my two older sons were both, they played the soccer in the community soccer, and then they were both on the robotics team. I think my oldest son marched in the Macy's Day Parade because they were the main, they let it off that year. So it's, I've been an active member and my family's been an active member. And so it's not like somebody who's been in St. Lucie County forever and just popped back. I've been a longtime resident of Martin County. So I just think that's important to say. And then you can find I don't know what my Facebook page is, but my website is Susan O'Rourke from Martin.com.
Awesome. And I guess on Facebook they could search or something.
Yeah, you'll find me, Susan O'Rourke campaign. So unfortunately these days it's not too hard to find anybody if they want to look them up online or find out where you are. But it's helpful if you're running for office. So thanks for coming to it. It was great to talk to you, and I appreciate you being on. Thank you, Josh. It was my pleasure.
That's a wrap for this episode of The Current by TreasureCoast.com. If you enjoyed the conversation, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Follow us on social media or visit TreasureCoast.com for local events, tips, and news. Have a guest or topic you'd love to hear on the show? Let us know at TreasureCoast.com. Until next time, keep riding the current and enjoying everything the Treasure Coast has to offer. See you soon.